Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being on the call. I'm sorry that we can't meet in person. Ted Phillips is also on the call, and he is available to answer any questions you may have of him. This is my first opportunity to speak to you since the passing of your colleague and friend, Jeff Dickerson. I want to join the many people offering their condolences to his family and friends. JD earned the respect and admiration of both his competitors on the beat and those he covered. We've read touching tributes to him from many of you. We offer our prayers and support to his family, especially his son, Parker. Parker Dickerson is about the same age as Matt Nagy's sons. An NFL head coach understands and accepts that he'll be subjected to a fair amount of criticism, and that unfortunately, some of it will be personal. Coaches' children do not strike the same bargain. What Matt's oldest son was made to endure at a high school playoff football game was shameful and inexcusable. All he wanted to do was play a game he loves with his friends. Coaches' kids should be off limits. Ryan's and Matt's kids probably aren't very happy with the Bears right now, but they were, are, and always will be part of the Bears family. I want to take a moment to thank the larger Bears family. This is a demanding business, and it requires extraordinary sacrifices from players, coaches, football operations staff, and their families. We're grateful for those sacrifices and for the people who make them. The decisions we're making today are especially difficult because Ryan and Matt are outstanding men. They have high character and have always represented the Bears with dignity and class. They gave everything they had to the Bears, and we appreciate those efforts. In a discipline dominated by outsized personalities and egos, they are remarkably down to earth and free of ego, always putting team before themselves. 2018 was a great ride, 12 wins and a division title. Ryan was executive of the year and Matt was coach of the year. We thought we were on our way. Unfortunately, it could not be sustained. Instead, we regressed. Our offense failed to show improvement. We continued to struggle at home. We did not close the gap within our division. In the end, we didn't win enough games. Our guys never quit, and that's a tribute to our players, the type of player Ryan looked for in the draft and free agency, and the way Matt and his staff coached them. It's a little unfair to highlight individual players in a team sport, but I want to commend David Montgomery and Roquan Smith, who gave everything they had on every play. That's why they're fan favorites. At the end of the 2020 season, we had a decision to make. Matt's one-loss record was well above 500, and we have been to the playoffs 2 out of 3 seasons, but with 0 playoff wins. We felt that Ryan and Matt had earned the opportunity to improve upon the results of 2019 and 2020, that continuity was the best route to positive results. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Over 4 seasons, we beat the teams we were expected to beat. Too often, though, we didn't beat the better teams. And you have to do that to excel in this league. Our search for a general manager and a head coach begins today. It will be thorough, diligent, and exhaustive, and will result in the best possible selections to lead the Bears to success. The general manager will be responsible for the entire football operation. For head coach, we will not be limited by philosophy, scheme, whether a candidate's background is on the offensive side of the ball, defensive, or special teams, whether a candidate has previous head coaching experience, whether a candidate's background is in the college game or the pro game, or financial considerations. Our search team will consist of myself, Ted Phillips, Hall of Famer Bill Polian, our Vice President of Player Engagement, Soup Campbell, and our Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Tanisha Wade. I expect that we will reach a consensus on both positions. Ultimately, though, the decision on the next general manager and head coach will be mine. Ted has done an outstanding job as president and CEO of the Bears and will continue in that role. Our family has complete faith in him. He has persuaded me that with the pending acquisition of the Arlington Park property and its evaluation as a possible future Bear stadium occupying much of his time and attention, the general manager should report to me. In this modified organizational structure, general manager will continue to oversee the entire football operation, including the head coach. The GM will report to ownership. Bill Polian is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame because of his success as a pro football executive, including his hiring of 2 head coaches, Marv Levy and Tony Dungy, who are themselves in the Hall of Fame. He is well regarded in league circles and has a lot of contacts. We consider ourselves very fortunate to have Bill assisting us in our search. Soup Campbell is on board to offer his perspective on the candidates, including and especially how will our players respond to this candidate as our leader. Tanisha Wade was recently named to the newly created position of Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is involved in all of our hiring. These are the most significant hires we make. Diversity is a critical part of the process. We are committed to providing a fair opportunity throughout the process to people of color. Frustrated Bears may be thinking, what makes him think he's going to get it right this time? We're confident that with the experience we've gained and with the makeup of our search team, we will find a general manager and a head coach who will lead our Bears to the success that all Bears fans deserve. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take your questions. Adam?
Okay, first question, Hub.
Well, George, first of all, I know this is a really difficult time for you and the family, that these are people you're fond of, that you had to let go. And so I hope you and everybody is doing okay and getting ready to move on to the next challenge. Obviously you are, because you just answered my first 4 or 5 questions in your opening statement. So I'll move to the next one. There's been a lot of focus on the timing of everything and the opportunity to be out front in your search. Had you at any time notified Matt or Ryan as to what was going to happen? Have you already begun talking to any candidates? And if not, how critical is it to get the general manager hired first before you can get into the coaching search?
Matt and Ryan were informed of our decision this morning. We'll start contacting candidates today. Ideally, the general manager would be selected first, but if we see a head coach candidate that we think is the right one, we're going to do what it takes to get him in-house.
If I could just follow up real quickly, though, in terms of a general manager with unfettered control of the football operation, wouldn't that restrict you a little bit if you had already chosen a coach before he came on board?
I think with Bill's guidance, we're going to be able to find a partnership of general manager and a head coach that will work. Like I said, we would prefer to hire the general manager first.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Hub.
Next question, Dan Weeder.
George, I'm curious what your resistance is to the attempt to try a new model where someone with a more sophisticated football background would oversee the general manager position.
Thank you, Dan, for that question. In our structure, it's the general manager who has ultimate football authority and oversight over the entire football operations. Different structures, different work for different teams and different sports. We think this is the structure that will work best for us.
When you evaluate the performance of a general manager, and obviously that relates to obviously evaluation of Ryan, and then obviously going into your search going forward for a new general manager, what for you are the specifics you look at, whether it's metrics, analytics, whatever it may be, to determine whether a general manager is successful in that role?
Well, this is a bottom line business. So one loss record is important. Number of difference makers you have on your team, the number of quality players you have on your team, the core of the team, and how the team is put together are all factors that are considered.
Next question, Pat Finley.
Hi, George. A year ago, you sat up here and said that you would look for progress. How did you measure it? Did it go beyond wins and losses? And did you lean on a consultant or any outside voices over the last month or 2 or 3 when evaluating whether you would make this decision?
We've talked to a number of people throughout the pro football world. We asked Bill to help us with evaluating our general manager and head coach and helping us make a decision on whether to retain and replace. And if we moved to a replacement situation, to help us in our search to find the replacements.
When did that process begin? And can you tell us about the other people you leaned on?
It started at some point during the season. I can't recall exactly when. As far as our conversations with other people in football, we consider those conversations to be private, and we will not be revealing the identities of those people or the substance of those conversations.
Next question, Adam Hogue.
George, just to make sure, you did say that Ted will be helping in the search for GM and head coach, right?
That's correct.
So obviously, the GM going forward reporting to you is slightly different. With that change, why do you still have Ted involved in finding the GM?
Because I trust Ted implicitly, because I have great respect for his judgment, his analytical skills, his instincts when it comes to the people that we're interviewing. And in the end, he'll be negotiating the contract with the general manager and the head coach.
Kevin Fishbane.
George, having gone through these interviews a few times now, what have you learned that's going to help guide your approach in the interviews that's going to be different? Are there different things you're looking for, different qualities you're looking for as you meet with these prospective GMs and head coaches that maybe you might not have looked for the other times you've done this?
We'll be looking for leaders, both in the general manager and the head coach. In our conversations with Bill Polian, in fact, he just wrote a book, Super Bowl Blueprints, where he talks about what it takes to get to and win the Super Bowl. And he said he was even struck by great teams have coaches that the players respect. They don't have to like them, they don't have to love them, but they respect them. And so the primary quality we'll be looking for in both the general manager and the head coach is leadership.
Brad Diggs.
Hi, George.
Hi, Big Z.
Football operations has not been, good enough because that leads you down the road to get to today's actions. You have a new stadium initiative going. How do you handle 2 parallel projects that seem like both would be full-time initiatives?
Well, they are both full-time initiatives, and we're adding staffing and hiring outside vendors to help us with our exploration of the Arlington Park property as a possible stadium site. That is a long-term proposition. In the meantime, we're focused on the here and now and the more important business of finding the next general manager and head coach of the Chicago Bears.
Jason Leisure.
Hey, George, do you believe that the Bears would be better? Do you believe the Bears would be better off if you had made these changes a year ago?
Well, like I said, at the time, we thought the continuity was the best route forward. And we felt that both Ryan and Matt deserved another opportunity, being to the playoffs 2 out of 3 seasons, above 500 record from a coaching standpoint. We felt that they deserved, based on the body of work of both of them, another opportunity.
Colleen King.
George, based on the optimism you had at this time last year, what was the most frustrating part of this past season for you?
Well, Colleen, there were a lot of frustrating parts. Another lengthy losing streak. We had one in 2019, one in 2020, one in 2021. And usually those are season enders. I admired the way our guys stuck together, didn't point fingers, but at some point, general manager and the head coach have to come up with a way to snap us out of a losing streak before the season is ruined.
Mark Potash.
Hey, George, you mentioned that you think this model with you at the top works. I'm curious why you think this model works. I mean, with 2 winning seasons and no playoff wins in your 11 seasons, isn't there merit to the argument that somebody else should be heading this search and that the GM should be reporting to a Bill Polian type only? I mean, do you get it that a lot of Bears are unhappy with your record as well?
Yeah, we get that a lot of Bears fans are unhappy, and we're unhappy too, and we're frustrated, and we understand that there's not really a whole lot that can be said today that is going to make people feel better about the situation. And it may even be that once the candidates are introduced, there will be people who say, oh, you picked the wrong guy, or you didn't get it right, or whatever. The only opportunity to produce results is on the field, and that won't be for some time to come. But we think in time, it'll be shown that we've chosen the right people to lead the Bears.
But George, I'm referring to your record as the chairman. How are you accountable for the record that you have? Like you said, it's a bottom line business, wins and losses, no playoff wins, 2 winning seasons. That's not a great record. So how are you accountable for it? And like I said, does that lend merit to the idea that somebody else should be, like a Bill Polian type should be at the top?
Yeah, my performance is reviewed by ownership and the board of directors, and ownership has informed me that it wishes me to continue in this role.
Thanks.
Herb Howard.
George, is it your preference that the next general manager comes in with the plan of kind of reloading some of the assets that you already have, or do you prefer them to view this as a complete rebuild where guys like perhaps a Khalil Mack could be leveraged for future assets? Do you have a preference whether they view this as a rebuild or a reload completely?
Thanks, Herb. We're looking forward to hearing what the candidates' plans are for getting the Bears back to the top. We'll leave that to them to present the details to us. We don't have a particular approach in mind.
Chris Emma.
George, given the way that the losses piled up this season and the fact that you have a rookie quarterback and young players, what kept you from dismissing Matt Nagy sooner?
We were evaluating throughout the season. We didn't have any preconceived notions about a particular timeline or a particular timetable. Our evaluation was concluded last night and resulted in the decisions that we announced this morning.
Sean Hammond.
Hi, George. We haven't gotten to speak with you since the Arlington Heights news broke. I'm just curious, who's in charge of that project for you guys? And I guess what exactly what has to happen next, and what does that timeline look like?
Ted Phillips is in charge of that project, and I think the best way to explain it is anybody who's bought a house or a lot to build a house, there's a time between when the property is under contract and closing. And during that time, There are a number of things that need to be done in terms of due diligence, making sure that there's clear title to the lot, house or lot. If it's a lot, determining whether it's a buildable lot and so forth. A lot of regulations that need to be checked out. Well, in a property of this size, that closing, that time between under contract and closing is vastly expanded. So there's a lot of due diligence that needs to be performed before we can close.
Mark Grody?
Hello, George. Was it your decision, or at least urging, to have Justin Fields take over as the starting quarterback with the Bears when he did this year?
No.
What did you think of the plan this year that Matt Nagy had? Were you all for the idea, the blueprint of Andy Dalton potentially being the quarterback the whole year?
I went out of my way to emphasize to Matt that ownership has no interest whatsoever in determining which players play, especially at the quarterback position, and that it's entirely a coaching decision.
Matt Zahn?
George, sort of going back to Mark Podish's question a little bit, I assume a lot of Bears fans out there are not going to be all that pleased that Ted Phillips is still involved in this process, considering the lack of success you guys have had with this structure over the years. Why did you feel the need to not consider maybe changing this structure going forward?
We did talk about what was the best path forward. I don't think there's anything magical about a so-called football czar. At some point, the football person, whether it's the general manager or an executive vice president or a president of football operations, at some point, that person has to report to ownership. And we think with the modification that we've made, we've got the right structure for the Bears going forward.
John Greenberg?
George, I know you made it clear that you're making the final decision. This is your decision. I think we all understand that. Sounds like Bill Polian has a lot of power in this decision. He's been out of the league. He got fired from the Colts 10 years ago. And I know he's still been involved in TV and other things, consulting stuff. Why aren't you just making the decision? Why do you need someone like Bill Polian to kind of guide you here? Because you've been doing this for a while now.
Well, I think it would be a fair criticism if somebody said, I'm going to make this decision all by myself and I'm not going to get any input from anybody else. People would be wondering where this guy is coming from. We have a great resource available to us, and we're going to take full advantage of that resource. I expect that there will be vigorous discussion and debate after we interview each candidate. I was struck in our earliest conversations with Bill how very much on top of the game he is, and even on our situation. When we called him out of the blue and he was asking us detailed questions about our roster, our injury situation with particular players, he was very much up on the game in general and the Bears situation in particular. So I think we'll be in good hands, leaning on Bill to help us make this decision.
Adam Johns?
Hey, George, how would you articulate your current belief in Justin Fields? And then the next part of that, would you like to see him get involved when this reaches maybe the coaching search process? Would you like him to get to know some of these guys before you make that final decision?
Well, I'm just a fan. I'm not a football evaluator. And as a fan, what I see is a dynamic player with a lot of potential, a lot of ability, a lot of heart, and a strong work ethic. So we're looking for a general manager and a head coach who will develop not just the quarterback position, but the talent around him, and establishing a strong defense to help the quarterback to bring the Bears to success. Justin will not be an active part of the search process, but we'll be very interested to hear from both general manager and head coach candidates what their plan is to get the most out of the quarterback position for us.
Cam Ellis?
George, you guys announced this decision almost simultaneously as players were talking to the media. Was it always the plan to have the players talk before the decision makers about this? And do you think that was the appropriate way to handle it?
I'm sorry, Cam, I don't understand your question about the timing and the players.
Right, like the players were telling us that they had heard about this news, on Twitter, and do you think that it was appropriate that they speak on the firings before you two did?
Oh, well, in this day and age, you can't stop things from getting out on social media. We knew that after we informed Matt and Ryan of our decisions, that the likelihood is that it would get out on social media before we put out a statement. But these days, there's not a lot you can do about that.
Andy Seligman?
Yeah, hey, George. Going forward, when it comes to the decision of whether to retain the GM or the coach, will Ted have any involvement in that?
I expect that Ted's advice and counsel will be drawn on just as it has for many years. But as I said, ultimately, the general manager will report to the chairman, and the decision on the hiring ultimately is mine.
Joe Lewis?
Yeah, hi, George. You mentioned Bill Polian and, the years that he's had. You mentioned yourself. Was there ever, or is there ever a concern or a thought given to possibly having a younger group of, I guess, his consorts looking into a GM and head coach? Because it's not, of course, to, shade your age, but the game has changed since the last time Bill Polian was really active in the league 10 years ago. So was there ever a consideration to perhaps a younger group or people who have been in the league as it's modernized more recently?
Well, I appreciate the spirit of the question, Joseph. Yes, we're not exactly spring chickens, but Bill's been around the game for a long time. He knows the game very well. And I recall George Hallis was in his 80s when he made a then very controversial, but ultimately successful selection for a head coach. And Bill's much younger than that.
Steve Leventhal?
Yeah, hi, George. This is for you and Ted if he wants to chime in. One of my esteemed colleagues who's on this call wrote an extensive piece analyzing the team over the last couple of years. And one of the core tenets was the dismay that a lot of former players who all have extensive contacts really weren't involved or have been consulted. And how come, since you mentioned who your committee is, how come you don't have any former players on that committee?
Well, I would welcome Ted's comments. I'll just say that we love it that our former players feel so strongly about wanting the Bears to be successful. A lot of them are season ticket holders. We welcome their input. I would say as a general proposition, I'm probably more reluctant to seek the feedback of players who or former players who are on media outlets. I don't want to have to put them in the position of deciding what is a confidential conversation and what is okay to share with on the air. We reach out to our former players on a regular basis and look forward to continuing to do that.
Next question, Dan Wiederer.
George, how and when did the union with Bill Polian come together for you?
Like I said, I don't recall the exact timing. It was at some point during this past season.
And then moments ago, you made the admission. You said, I'm a fan. I'm not a football evaluator. With that admission made, how can you perform a comprehensive evaluation of your general manager through those sets of lenses?
Well, again, this is a results-oriented business, so it'll be largely wins and losses, making the playoffs, success in the playoffs, advancing in the playoffs, and winning the Super Bowl. That's how success is measured in this business.
Pat Finley.
George, have the Bears ruled out playing downtown at a new stadium?
Pat, our exploration of the Arlington Heights project was determined in large part by the seller. This was just a piece of property that was put out for sale. We were contacted by them or an agent for them. And we saw this as an outstanding long-term proposition with high potential for the Bears. Meantime, we're happy to engage with the city of Chicago and the Park District about present operations at Soldier Field.
What was the last time that happened, that engagement?
I don't remember. I think it was a few weeks ago.
David Hall? You're muted, David. David, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Hello, George. So
that was one of the best questions you've ever asked.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to get an answer just as good. When you are in the room with these candidates, who is with you, and how do you envision asking these questions of guys who have experience, who maybe have won championships, and that whole process? How would you describe the way it will go?
The people in the room are myself, Ted, Bill, Soup, and Tanisha. We expect a candid and free-flowing conversation. Bill said that when he interviewed Tony Dungy, he knew in the first 12 minutes that Tony was his guy, and they proceeded to talk football for another 8 hours. So we're looking forward to in-depth conversations like that.
Quick follow-up. Did you talk to Tony Dungy and seek his counsel when you moved in this direction?
Anybody else that we may have conferred with in the football world, we're keeping those conversations confidential.
Kevin Fishbane?
A question for Ted. Obviously, Ted, you understand your reputation over the past few seasons in town, and you know, whether it's on here or talk shows, what have you. I'm curious, did you consider bowing out of the coach and GM search? Obviously, I know that there's a change, but did you consider not taking part in it and letting George and Bill and Soup and Tanisha take it from there?
Hi, Kevin. I would say to you that I think the group that we have has different viewpoints, different ways of looking at leadership, different ways of looking at the skill sets of the different candidates. So I think I'm looking forward to it, and my 38 years at the Bears and being involved in a number of these searches, I think I've learned a lot, and I think I have a lot to add going forward.
Well, a quick follow-up then, because this question I asked George earlier. How are you individually going to treat this differently in interviews than you have in the past? Because again, you look at the results of the past hires have not gone the way you guys were hoping. So what's going to be different for you and your perspective when you're talking to these prospective GMs and head coaches?
Well, I would say this, that the hiring of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, I don't regret that. They both brought a lot to the Bears. Now, ultimately on the field, the results weren't where we wanted it to, but I think they've checked a lot of the boxes. You can't ask for better leaders. You can't ask for better forward thinkers. You can't ask for people that gave their all, had great work ethic, were humble. And we're going to look for a lot of those same qualities, and hopefully with Bill's vast expertise in the technicalities of coaching strategy and valuation processes, that's going to add a nice added benefit to our search and going to help us find the right people.
Adam Hogue?
George, I guess coming off of actually what Ted just said, I mean, all due respect, at this point, I think the fans just care about winning football games. What you're describing in this process, I have to be honest, sounds a lot like 2015, where it was you and Ted. You guys hired Ernie Accorsi to come in. to help you guys. And here we are 7 years later. So why should Bears fans trust that this time, regardless of the people you guys hire and their individual qualities, that it's going to result in wins on the field?
Yeah, Adam, that's the important thing. And I don't think we're going to convince them today, or like I said, perhaps even the day that our next general manager and head coach are introduced. We've got to have results on the field. That's the only thing that matters. And that's when we'll win Bears fans over. Bill Polian talks in his books about decisions he made as a general manager that were considered wildly unpopular at the time. But eventually they bore fruit, and you have to be ready and willing to make what may very well be an unpopular decision if you're convinced it's best for the Bears.
Brad Biggs.
George, as a member of the NFL's diversity committee, is it important for you to make minority hires or a hire for these two openings that you have in the organization?
Brad, I don't think it's a particular obligation just because somebody's on a committee. I think it's a league-wide commitment, and it's a commitment to fairness in the process. What I keep hearing as a member of the diversity committee is that people just want a fair process. It's not a particular result, but as long as people get a fair shake, the same quality interview that another candidate may have gotten, the same opportunity to be heard that every other candidate gets. That's the important part, is the process. We don't know what the result is going to be.
Mark Potash.
Hey, George, when Trestman and Emery were fired, you said that Virginia was pissed off. I was curious, in this latest firing or change, whatever, what impact did Virginia have on this decision? And just, how much did that affect you, her feelings with regard to where the Bears are headed?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. She was consulted, she was conferred with, as was every other member of the Bears board. Everybody wants to win one for her, and we're doing everything we can to make that happen. At one point in our conversations, I asked her for her assessment of our season, and she said, as only a mother can, I'm very, very disappointed.
Jason Leisure.
George, is it your full intention to build a stadium in Arlington Heights if everything goes well with the property? And if so, when do you hope that happens? And same question to Ted as well.
Right now, Jason, all we're doing is exploring the property's potential. We don't even own the property yet. And any questions beyond that would be premature at this point.
But I doubt you're exploring it to build an outlet mall or something. I mean, do you intend to build a football stadium there?
We're exploring the viability of building a football stadium on that property.
And when would you ideally like to see that happen if it does happen? How soon?
We don't have a timetable yet because, as I said, we don't even own the property yet. So it would be sometime after closing before we could make that determination.
Yeah, I can add a little color to that if you want. The closing on the land probably is going to take the rest of this year, maybe into the first quarter of 2023. And at that point in time, we'll decide whether it's financially feasible to try to develop it further. And I think what's important now is that our focus for long-term development is exclusively on that property in Arlington Park.
Alex Shapiro.
Hi, George. You said that evaluating Matt and Brian was an ongoing process throughout the season, even up to today. wondering, was there any one moment or any one action that really made you say, this is the direction we need to go in?
I don't think so, Alex. Like I said, it's an evaluation of the person's entire body of work. If I could point to particular moments, and this wasn't so much the evaluations of Ryan and Matt themselves, but just where we were and are on the offensive side. I would say in the same calendar year, we twice scored the only touchdown of the game on literally the last play of the game. On the defensive side of the ball, I would point to this season, game one of our defenders fails to touch down a receiver who's on the ground. And in game 17, one of our defenders fails to touch down a receiver who's on the ground.
Dan Weider.
George, could you offer some insight on, and Ted as well, on this question on how Tanisha and Soup will be valuable resources to the search processes here in the coming weeks?
I think they're going to be great. They're both very excited about the opportunity. Like I said, the primary responsibility for Soup will be, can this person, both the general manager and the head coach, lead these players? And for Tanisha, she's just getting her feet under her in her new role as Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This will be a great learning experience for her. But these hires are so important that I felt it was important to involve her in the process.
Ted, same
I
question.
would just add to that, I think you guys know Soup Campbell, and he, on a daily basis, is in the locker room talking to the players. What's important? What's on their mind? What's bothering them? What are they happy about? From a whole host of different topics. So I think he will add great insight into how the locker room might react to different styles of coaching, different styles of leadership. So we're looking forward to that. And again, with Tanisha, she's very bright, and she will help us consider diversity of thought and kind of the implicit bias that a lot of people have when they go through trying to hire leadership in any, whether it's a coach or general manager.
Thanks for that. And then for either one of you, with the investment that the organization made last spring in drafting Justin, how do you go about assuring through these simultaneous searches that you wind up with a head coach and general manager combination that allow Justin to reach his full potential?
That'll be part of the challenge. With any general manager or head coaching candidate, we want to know what their plan is for the most important position on the field. How they would utilize Justin, who they would have coaching him, what players would they surround him with, how are they going to maximize his potential to lead the Bears to success.
Jesse Rogers.
George, back to when Justin was named the starter, you mentioned that earlier. Just a couple days after Matt said Andy would be the starter if he's healthy. Were you involved at least in the conversations with that? What went on during that time? And was there an organizational feeling that there'd be some growing pains if Justin was named the starter? The win-loss record may not look so good.
Matt and I talked about it. At one point, he asked me what I thought. And I said, I'm uncomfortable that you're even asking me the question. That's a coaching decision. And that's how we left it.
Zach Pearson.
Hey, George, when you guys are in the room evaluating candidates, whether it be head coach or general manager, for you, does it make a candidate more intriguing if he's had a previous connection to the franchise? I know it won't be the biggest difference maker or anything like that, but would it make him a little more intriguing?
I tried to say in my opening remarks as exhaustively as I could that we weren't going to limit the search, and whether a person has a Bears background or not would not disqualify a candidate.
Pat Finley?
George, last time you and Ted conducted interviews without a football guy with you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you talked to a couple of coaches right before you hired Ryan, correct, to take advantage of that 1 week period. What did you learn from that experience, and what can you tell Bears fans that would lead them to believe that the results will be better than they were the last time?
Well, like I said, Pat, I don't think we're going to convince him in the short term. It's only time that will bear out the results, and the charge to us will be finding the best general manager and head coach to bring about those results.
Nick Moriano?
Hey, George, what new roles will be created in the front office? Is there any interest in creating a research and strategy department?
Thank you, Nick. That'll be something that we'll have to discuss with the general manager and the head coaching candidates. And once they're hired, see what of those plans they want to implement.
Dan Pompey?
Hey, George, do you have an identity for the Chicago Bears in mind that you would like to promote with your hires?
Tough, gritty, smart, opportunistic, winning football.
Colleen King?
Hi, this question is for Ted regarding Arlington. Understanding there's still a long way to go in the process. What is the vision for the project, and what makes it an attractive possibility for you guys?
Hi, Colleen. It's as George pointed out, we didn't go to try to pursue this property and became available, but it is 326 acres. It's a extremely unique property. There's nothing else like it in Chicagoland. So the opportunities, we haven't even begun to envision what it could be. But we're hopeful that if we close, that we'll be, moving forward with turning it into a wonderful destination site. Again, timing of it, we don't know because we haven't even closed on the land. And if we don't close on the land, then all that vision won't come to fruition. But we're excited. It can be an entertainment destination of with multiple facets to it that I think could really help put Arlington Heights on the map as a destination spot.
Andy Seligman?
George, if Ted is involved in the search and in the decision to, going forward in terms of whether to retain the GM or not, or the coach or not, then how much is really changing here in terms of the operational structure?
Well, the change in the interview room is that we've got 3 new people in the room. So we've got the benefit of their perspective. Organizationally, it remains to be seen how much is going to change because I haven't had a general manager report to me. So I've got a lot to learn in that regard, and counting on the new general manager to help me along in that process.
Adam Johns?
Hey, George, to go back to Justin Fields a little bit, given the investment in him, giving up the first round pick this year and whatnot, if a candidate says that he doesn't like him, doesn't want to keep him, wants to move on, would that automatically discount them or disqualify them from the position of GM or coach?
Well, I think I've said before, I don't entertain hypotheticals. We're interested in hearing what the candidates have to say about the development of the entire football organization, and especially the quarterback position. We want to know what their plan is to develop that position for us.
David Hall?
Or just to follow up on that, because I think that's a critical question. I think what we're asking is, it's not a hypothetical. If the candidate, you're a fan and you say that you like what you see in Justin Fields, but if somebody who is a football person that you're interviewing, a head coach candidate or a GM, has reservations about his potential, does that potentially disqualify that person from getting a job with you?
Well, I don't want to get into a semantics debate with you, but the first word of your question was if. That to me presents a hypothetical, and we don't know what the candidates have had to say because we haven't interviewed any of them yet. We want to know what their plan is for that position for the Bears.
Is thinking Justin Fields can be a franchise quarterback a prerequisite for either the general manager or the head coach of the Bears?
We want to know what their plan is for the quarterback position for the Bears.
Pat Finley.
Hi, this question's for Ted. Ted, last year at this, you said, have we won enough games? No. Or have we gotten the quarterback situation completely right? No. Have we won enough games? No. But everything else is there. Do you still believe that?
Well, clearly we weren't happy with the results. So we need to get better. And I think, as George pointed out, besides the fact that the general manager is going to report to him, which is a big change, we're going to look to the general manager to structure his personnel department in a way that he feels he has enough support and enough expertise so that he can not only oversee the coaching, the head coach, but also his personnel department, and to be able to ultimately set, along with the head coach, plans for each player and to hold the coach accountable for the schemes that he develops. So that's what I think we need to do going forward.
Brad Biggs.
George, from your position, what happened during Thanksgiving week? You guys were in a real tough patch. That firestorm sort of erupted. In retrospect, could the club have handled that differently, or should it have been handled differently?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. The way I viewed that situation, a reporter who doesn't normally cover the Bears put out an erroneous report, quoting one, not even quoting, attributing it to one unnamed source, and called us to ask for comment only after the story had been posted. It was on a website that before that day I had never heard of. We discussed it internally and decided that as long as we addressed it internally, I didn't feel any particular obligation to address an erroneous report publicly. My concern was that it just seemed to be thrown out there to see what our reaction was. And that if you deny that report or refute that report, and you don't deny or refute the next erroneous report, that people attach some significance to that. Ted and I talked to Ryan and Matt about it that day. I spoke to the team about it the next day. If I had to do it all over again, I would have spoken to Ryan and Matt about it even sooner and spoken to the team even sooner. But as long as we addressed it internally, I didn't feel any need to address it publicly.
Adam Hogue.
George, Olin Kreutz told a story the other day about how the Bears offered him essentially somewhat of a consulting role with the offensive line for $15 an hour. Were you aware of that offer when it happened? And what was your reaction whenever you were aware of it?
I've learned over the years to take just about anything that Olin says with a grain of salt. And I look forward to hearing that story again and hope he includes it in his Hall of Fame induction speech.
So you're saying that it's not true?
That's the way it is sometimes with Olin. Don't get the whole story. And Olin knows what the story is.
Kevin Fishbane?
George, you said earlier that when Matt went to you about talking to you about quarterback, you were uncomfortable talking football with him. Should you at this point in your time as chairman be comfortable talking about football? And do you see in the future getting to a juncture where as the person ultimately in charge of this football team to be able to be involved in those conversations?
I didn't say that I was uncomfortable talking football with Matt. I love talking football with Matt and with Ryan and with all of our football people. That's what makes this game great. I said that I was uncomfortable that Matt was even asking my opinion about who should be the starting quarterback of the Chicago Bears, because that is entirely a coaching decision.
Dan?
George, realistically, how deep do you envision the lists for each of these jobs, general manager and head coach, of candidates to be?
Great question, Dan. I don't know. I expect lengthy lists for both positions, and we're going to work through them and get the best person at each position for the Bears.
At the outset, you said that there would be the potential of, if there was a can't miss head coaching candidate, that you would move to secure that person before hiring a general manager. What would the criteria be? What boxes that would be checked that would make you move in that fashion to secure a coach before you hired a general manager?
I would say that we'll know him when we see him.
Okay, we have time for a couple more. Pat Finley?
George, a version of this was asked earlier, but I'm going to try again. A connection to the Bears, whether it's somebody who you know personally or who your family's had a relationship with, would that give you some sense of comfort in making a hire with somebody that you know versus somebody that you're just getting to know?
It would depend, Pat, on who that person was and what their vision was for the Bears.
And last question, Mark Potash?
Hey, George, after Ryan and Matt did not work out, does that alter the value you place on nice guys who get along and collaborate? You know, are you any more likely now to hire some no-nonsense hard guy who might ruffle some feathers but gets results? In other words, is it time to think a little more outside the box and hire someone who might want to do some things that aren't exactly your style or this organization's style?
Ryan and Matt weren't hired because they're nice guys. And we're not looking for a particular personality type. It's who can best lead the Bears to success.
But the idea that they collaborated and you know that they got along and so like, why did that not work out? That was the value you put on it, which is what a big reason why they stayed last year. Why did that not work out?
Well, I think if you look around the league, you'll see various instances of dysfunction, and that relationship between the general manager and the head coach is absolutely critical. In our conversations with Bill Polian, he's told us it's that relationship between the general manager and the head coach, and the relationship between the head coach and the quarterback that will determine the success of your team. So we don't want somebody that's always agreeing with each other. We want vigorous debate, but at the end of the debate, we want people breaking on the plan and united behind the vision.
All right, George and Ted, thanks for your time. Appreciate everyone joining the call. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Go Bears.